My name is Yaakov or Jacob, whatever is easier for you. I'm 31 years old. I'm married. I have 2 little daughters. I've been living here in the Golan Heights for the past 5 years. I moved there. I was born and raised in the old city of Jerusalem. I was born to American parents who came to Israel 30-something years ago. My mother's from Atlanta, Georgia. My father's from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I spent a year of my life in Atlanta, Georgia when I was in 8th grade, so you can say a redneck, I'll probably turn around. And that's why I like the Braves hats, even though I don't like baseball too much, but still, I can say I'm a Braves fan somehow. I moved there 5 years ago due to my military position. I served, and I still serve, in an armored corps tank unit called the 188 Brigade. The brigade, the headquarters of the brigade, are located here in the Golan Heights. And I served there for 9.5 years, from 2007 to 2016. I started as a tank driver. After 5 years, I went to be in the IDF Tactical Command College, which is the closest thing we have to West Point, I guess. Although it's very different, because we start from the field, and then after a few years, when we're already officers, the IDF selects us to go do our undergraduates. So for 2 years, I was out of the field, drills here and there, a lot of military strategy, history, geopolitics, Islam, and after that, I went back to the field. I was a company leader for a year, commanding 11 tanks. My last job, which lasted in different levels, was Combat Operations Officer, the COO, first of a battalion, which in Israel is about 30 tanks. And then, that's a role I did in 2014 in the Gaza campaign. When I say Gaza 2014, you're familiar a little bit? Have you guys been to the Gaza envelope yet? Not yet? Are you going to be there? Okay. So the last war we had in Gaza in 2014, I was there as a combat operations officer in the tank with my commander, the lieutenant colonel inside Gaza. And my last job, which I still do till today, is the combat operations officer of the whole brigade, which is 4 different battalions, 3 tanks, 1 combat engineering. Very different than the American Army. If we would have another hour, I would like you to explain to me, because I've met so many groups of West Point and ROTC and God knows where, and I still can't figure out the structure of your army. In Israel, it's just you have tanks, you have infantry, combat engineering, that's it. With you, it's the better way, let's be honest. But So I'll just say I left the Army 2.5 years ago. My real commander said if I want to have children, I got to be home. So I left the Army, but I'm still part of the unit. I'll just say this past Sunday, I was on reserve duty. And in July, in the middle of July, the head commander of the IDF, the chief of staff, scheduled a drill, a very intense drill for 3 days for my unit. So I'm going to be down there. It's going to be down south, aimed towards Gaza. We're raising our preparations, understanding that in the next war, if hopefully we don't have to go to, but if we go into Gaza next time, it's going to be very, very different than the last time, where we went in for just 2 miles inside, eliminated the threat we had, which was the tunnels. This time, he said, we're going deep inside, and we realized for the past few years we haven't been training in urban warfare. When I say urban warfare, high buildings. We've been, the suburbs, that area. Now, he wants us to go deep inside, so we're going to, every unit, he comes personally to inspect it and see how we're doing. So my vacation is ruined. But, that's part of being part of a combat unit. And my unit, just so you understand, I'm a reserve soldier in an active unit. My unit right now, we have 1 battalion in Mount Hermon up there. We have 1 battalion down the Egyptian border and 2 battalions in the West Bank. And, the headquarters are here. And the unit's in action right now. And the good thing about it is that if God forbid war breaks out, I'm going to be there to protect my country. The bad thing is that I'll have a young dumbass soldier called me at 3 a.m. to ask me something about a PowerPoint, and I have to explain to them that even though my name is there and I have a role here, I'm out of the Army. Don't wake up my daughters. So they learn, but then a year later they leave the Army, and then I have to yell at another guy, and then they learn again. So with that said, in the next 35 minutes more or less, I want to talk about the Syrian border. I'll start with explaining what do we see in front of us. Then I want to take zoom out. I'll do a zoom out and give maybe the curriculum to the conflict happening in Syria. And I want to map a few challenges I view as a combat officer on the tactical level. What are the challenges I see with the Syrian border in front of us? And then also maybe, of course, I have to also talk about the big picture. What do our Prime Minister and Security Minister and the Chief of Staff see when they look at Syria, and what are those challenges? So I'll start with talking about what do we see in front of us. We're standing on a mountain called Mount Bental. If you look right to my left, your right, you will see another mountain with a bunch of antennas on it, which is called Mount Avital. It's like twin mountains with a valley in between. If we continue looking south to your right, you'll see another mountain or a mountain ridge with wind turbines on it. You see 10 wind turbines there? Okay, I'm not going to start confusing with all the names, but I want you to notice one thing. Now look to the north, look to your left, and you will see here a little mountain right under us. Looks like it's sort of chopped off. See what I'm talking about? It's like green and yellow, and suddenly there's like brown in the middle. It's like chopped off. And after that, you have another mountain with snow on it. That is Mount Hermon, the highest mountain in Israel, which we call in Israel the eyes of Israel. On a good day, today is not the best view. On a good day from Mount Hermon with different scopes, you can see far to the beaches of Tel Aviv. You can see the guys, they're getting their tan. So that's why it's so crucial to Israel. The right side of Mount Hermon is Syrian, the left side is Israeli. So first of all, remember, I want you to remember, soon we're going to start with maps and everything. Remember this mountain ridge, and of course you can notice between every mountain we have a valley. In military terms, a pass, right, where mass troops can go through. Right under us, under this hill, you see there some white barracks. Everyone sees that there, like a group of white houses there. Okay, that is the UNDOF, or the UN headquarters in the Golan Heights. The UN force that's supposed to make sure, the ceasefire deal between Israel and Syria is kept. So that's their headquarters. And if you look to the left, you can see the border very, very, very clearly. You can see a fence going up that hill. Okay, everyone sees it? Look at the white houses, look to the left, and you see there's it's going up the mountain. Then it turns right towards the wind turbines. Okay, there's like a beige road, and there's a fence going up. Okay, if you continue with it right under us, you'll see the fence is going right here. I'm assuming when you do jeeps afterwards, you will get very, very close to the fence, and you'll see it very close. For those who still don't recognize, so the fields under us are Israeli. There's this very small water reservoir there. It's still Israeli. The fence goes right behind that little water reservoir, and past that, the trees and the ruined houses you see in the huge water reservoir is all Syrian. Now, if we look to the Syrian side, we're looking now into Syria. We have a town right under us here. The town is actually a destroyed town. It's ruins with many, many trees. Everyone sees what I'm talking about right under us? So this is called the Old Quneitra. This used to be the capital of the Golan Heights before 1967, when the Syrians were in control here. Israel controlled it for 6 years. After the 1973 Yom Kippur War, when I say 1973 Yom Kippur, are you familiar with a few of the terms of Israeli military history? So the 1973 war, which now I'm assuming you study some of the battles. There's very famous battles that happened here in the Golan Heights soil. So we gave it back to the Syrians. It was left in ruins. Actually, the Syrians blew it up and then left it in the ruins to tell the people, look at the Israeli occupation, look what the Israelis did to you. I can tell you, I have pictures that veterans of 1973 showed me of their tanks inside a built city. Okay, so that is the Old Quneitra, and it was left in its ruins as a symbol for our occupation. If you look to the left, right in front of us, I'm pointing right here, there's another big town. This is the new Quneitra. The Syrians built a new city, and they called it with the new Quneitra. You have about 20 to 30,000 people who were living there before the Syrian civil war started. I can't tell you an exact number today. One last thing I'm pointing out, and then we start talking about geopolitics and the importance of this place. You see on the Syrian side, there are 3 high mountains. Everyone sees what I'm talking about? Far in the last skyline. So these 3 mountains are part of what we call the Syrian mountain ridge. Just like we have the Israeli mountain ridge we're standing on, right, which gives us strategic control of what's happening on the other side, and of course what's happening behind us in Israel. So they also have their mountain ridge. Their mountain ridge is a bit lower than ours, meaning with the heights, we have the advance of the heights here. And one thing I want to point out, the 3 mountains, which again, I'm not going to confuse with a bunch of Arabic names because we're going to get that soon. I'll just say the left one, the northern one of them is called Tel Sha'el. Why is this important? Because Monday night, the IDF striked in Syria. This is something we're allowed to say. It was on the news. It was exactly there. That's the mountain we hit in Syria. An anti-aircraft missile was shot from that mountain at an Israeli plane flying here. So we bombed the heck out of that place to make sure the message is very, very clear. So if you follow the news, it was right here in front of you. With that said, let's say a word about the Golan Heights. So now we start with maps. First map or illustration, can everyone see? Tell me if you don't see. You see here the Golan Heights. The border is, let's put it actually in front of the field. The border, first of all, is 100 kilometers, about 60 miles. It starts in the south from the tri-state border of Israel, Jordan, and Syria. and it ends in Mount Hermon, which we see right there, the mount with the snow. Now you see all along the border, first of all, the mountain ridge I spoke about, right? You see the mountains. So that's the first thing I want to point out. The second thing is, why is the Golan Heights so important for Israel? So two main reasons. First of all, the Golan Heights. When you sit in the Golan Heights, the highest place in Israel, you're controlling what we call the finger of the Galilee. The northern part of the Galilee, which you came from, Metula and that area, which you had this with Major General Tibon there. So that area is controlled from the Golan Heights. And for 19 years, from the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 to the Six-Day War in 1967, just like in Gaza, a terrorist wakes up in the morning and shoots a rocket at Israel and shuts down a third of the country and, everything around Gaza. That was the situation here. Syrian soldiers were sitting in the Golan Heights, controlling the Israeli villages and farms under them. And there are songs written by Israeli poets who lived in the area about the girls, the children who were raised in the bomb shelters, because they were constantly under pressure from this area. The second thing that's crucial about the Golan Heights is that it controls Israel's most important water source. And you feel the Middle East, right? We're a very hot, dry region. Our most important water source is the Sea of Galilee, the Kinneret, and the Jordan River, which leads to it. The Golan Heights is very rich with water, but more importantly, controls the Sea of Galilee. And there were what we call the battles over the water for those 19 years, where the Syrians tried shifting the water to go to their side, and we needed the water to go to the Jordan River, and from there to the Sea of Galilee. So we had also military conflicts over that. In the fourth day of the Six-Day War, Israel comes to the Golan Heights. It takes 2 days to conquer the region, and the battles stop here at this mountain ridge because of its advance, because of the strategic control it gives us of both sides of the border. A very, very wise choice to stop here. It proves itself in 1973 when the Syrians attack. These mountains give us some sort of advance to hold back the Syrians. In this region, in the north of the Golan Heights, not one Syrian tank gets past the border. In the northern part, where it's more open, and there's a plateau there, so the Syrians do conquer part of the Golan Heights, but 3 days later, we're already back in control, and there's no more Syrian troops left here. In 2018 and 2019 now, when I discuss what's happening here, you'll understand how crucial the Golan Heights is for Israel. And I'll just say one more thing, and again, I'm avoiding politics, but I'm assuming you know the U.S. administration recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights 2 months ago. And I'm part of a strategic team today of people who deal with foreign affairs from the Golan Heights who are trying to see, okay, what are we doing with this development? For over 50 years, we were considered an occupied territory, even though we were a consensus. International community understood why is it so crucial for us to sit here. I can say with the Syrian civil war, which I'll start in a minute talking about, it was even more clear when we had ISIS on our border and Al-Qaeda on our border. It was very, very clear why it's better to have them here and not have them by the Sea of Galilee. But we never had any official recognition, and this thing, on one hand, it brings us to the news again and raises us as a conflict area, right? Because some people don't. The European Union, for example, doesn't recognize us. And after they sort of let it go, now again we're on the table. The positive thing is that there's no bad publicity. So we're trying to draw in investors and different things to develop this place. Just so you understand, this region, which is huge. I'm horrible with the acres and dunam things, but just understand it's a very big region, the Golan Heights. There are less than 25,000 Jewish people living here and 28,000 Druze people living here. Have you guys discussed the Druze so far? So I'll just say there are 4 Druze villages in the north of the Golan Heights. Incredible complexity. These people are not loyal to Israel, but on the other hand, they want to be part of Israel. They just can't say it out loud because, first of all, their brothers are on the other side of the border. And secondly, for decades, the Golan Heights was in the negotiation table. And they realized if we give the Golan Heights to Syria, they will be slaughtered by Assad if they were loyal to us. So they're not Israeli citizens, they're residents in Israel. If you drive around the villages here in the Golan Heights and you have a camera, they'll say, we want to go back to Syria. And they have Syrian flags all over the villages. They have portraits of Assad in their villages. If you close the camera and sit down for coffee with them, and I can say this because they built my house, my constructor, my kitchen, the carpenter built my kitchen, they're all Druze. I have a lot of Druze hours of the Golan Heights. The worst thing that can happen to them is if they go back to that mess. Okay, so that's just another incredible phenomenon of the Middle East. And just one nice little anecdote, and we'll go on. This past summer, while the Russian, Syrian, Iranian coalition, which I'll discuss in a second, is attacking here this region, the groups that are linked to Al-Qaeda are under a lot of pressure. So what they decide to do is to attack a Druze village on the Syrian side of the border, which is right by the border with Israel. What happens is that on both sides of the border there are Druze villages, the same tribe, same family, and the political border splits between them. So one side is Israeli, one side is Druze, and the Al-Qaeda guys are attacking the Druze on the other side. Now just to understand, the Druze on the other side are loyal to the Syrian regime. They're loyal to Hezbollah, which you just discussed on the Lebanese border. They welcomed Hezbollah into their village, meaning they're maybe the biggest enemies Israel has on the other side of the border. And the Druze people in the Golan Heights say to Israel, if you guys don't help our brothers from Al-Qaeda, we will break the fence, we will break through and attack Al-Qaeda. And Israel brings here tanks, helicopters, drones, and gives a very clear message to Al-Qaeda. If you attack the Druze village, if you're continuing, you're messing with us. Basically meaning, we just saved the worst of our enemies in the region. In March 2011, these things that have been under the surface for decades explode. The whole thing collapses, what we used to call the Arab Spring. Today we call it the Islamic Winter. It starts very soon escalating here in Syria. People come out demonstrating in the streets. And very soon, by April 2011, it's a civil war. The Syrian army falls apart, basically. Many units of the Syrian army become opposition forces. And very soon, almost every radical jihadist group on earth starts becoming involved in this party. I call it a terror cocktail, a terror buffet. You have ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And of course, guys from Al-Qaeda think Al-Qaeda is too vegetarian, so they break off. And some guys say, no, it's bad for our PR. We can't fundraise from the West. We can't get Western support because we're Al-Qaeda. Let's become less radical. Just to understand, when I say a mess, we estimate between 600 to 6,000 different militias were operating in Syria in the last 8 years. When I say it's a mess, I meant it's a mess. Now, a few numbers, key events, and then I want to focus on Israel. So a few numbers. I said it began March 20, a few dates first of all. March 2011 it begins. By February 2013, this whole border, which we had a Syrian army presence on for 4 decades, is now under rebel control. Aside from Mount Hermon and the Druze village on its slopes, meaning 90% of the 60-mile border is controlled by different rebel groups, from Al-Qaeda to what we call the Free Syrian Army, a bunch of militias, and in the southern tip we have our dear friends from ISIS. Okay, I live in the south of the Golan Heights, so ISIS were my neighbors for a couple of years. It was fine. It wasn't as bad as it sounds. No, I'm serious. Remind me after it's halftime. I'll tell you a funny thing that happened to me last May with ISIS. That sounds even worse. I have to tell you. Okay, so for February, as I said, February 2013, we start a new era, which we're not familiar with, where we have a jungle on the other side of the border, and there's no address. There's no one to talk to, no one responsible for the border in front of us. September 2015, Assad is on the floor. He's down to controlling only 30% of Syria. And then Vladimir Putin steps in, Russia steps in with their air force mainly, and that's the game changer. Russia together with Iran are now starting to change the game. When I say Iran brings Hezbollah into Syria. At the high point, there are 7,000 Hezbollah fighters operating in Syria. They lost over 1,800 soldiers in this war, just to understand the effect this war had on Hezbollah, the negative. It has also positive things for them. And when they see Hezbollah is not enough, because Hezbollah says we also have to take care of Lebanon, we can't take care of everything here, Iran starts recruiting Shiite fighters from all around the Middle East. Today we estimate we have over 100,000, between 100 to 150,000 Shiite fighters in Syria. They are beginning paid by Iran. Today most of them are wearing Syrian army uniforms. Okay, but that's the game changer. The Iranians with boots on ground, the Russian Air Force and the Russian advisors, and very small, I can say very few Russian militias are the ones changing the game. And by July 2018, this border is already under Syrian control. Now, before I show a map of the current situation, or the situation up to February, because the map has already changed a few more times, I'll just say a few numbers. 600,000 casualties, 600,000 people killed. When I say, now other people can say, you'll hear the number 800,000, you'll even hear the number 1.3 million. Why? Because this past April was the rainiest April in years in Israel and in Syria. And a few little Syrian refugees drowned to death in the refugee camps. They are not counted. Okay? I count people killed from bullets, from the chemical attacks, over 300 chemical attacks. That's what we know to count more or less. If I start counting the outcomes of the war, right? Those side effects, whatever you want to call it, of hunger, diseases, etc., or people who don't get normal medical care, the numbers reach much higher. 13 million refugees. Remember how many people were living in Syria March 2011? 23 million people. That means more than half of the population are refugees. Half of these 13 million, 6.5 million, have fled to other countries. Just think about the demographic effects it has on Jordan, on Lebanon, on Turkey, Europe, right? That's the refugee crisis. Half of the refugees are what we call displaced refugees. They're in refugee camps all around Syria. Now, the Sunnis were 60%, right? Now, 600,000 killed, you understand the majority are Sunni, right? 13 million refugees, almost all Sunni. What does that do to their percentage in the population? They're down to about 40%, if not less. Who comes instead? I have 100,000 Shiite fighters. They've been away from home for years. If you today are one of these Shiite fighters and you have a little bit of savings, you can buy a whole building in one of these villages in front of us for a very, very cheap price, subsidized by the Iranian government. In other words, you can call it ethnical cleansing. I throw out the Sunnis because they're not comfortable for me, I don't like them, and I bring in the Shiites, which are much more comfortable to build what I want to build here. With that said, I'll just show a map of the situation up to February. I'll say what changed. So here's Syria again. This time we see military control. You see a lot of red. The red represents the regime. As you understood already, in the IDF, when we say regime, we say Iran and Russia, because we understand, and we got another approval to this just this past week. This past Sunday, Assad tried on his own. The Russians said for different reasons, we're not helping you. The Iranians said for financial reasons, the sanctions. We're not helping you. Assad said, no problem. I will conquer a village of rebels in northern Syria on my own. If you look on social media, I'll just say in one word, it was embarrassing. It was embarrassing what was happening there. They were being butchered, one after another. Dozens of Syrian soldiers are just killed. Without the Russian-Iranian support, the Syrian army won't exist 5 minutes.